Is that working, Josh?
Yep, I think so.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to.
Yeah, no problem. And how did this go on?
Give me 1 second. Give it a shot. Try advancing it.
Can you, is it working?
Yeah.
And this? Oh, there we go.
All right, give me 1 second. Let's get everyone along.
Okay.
Joining us. Bruce, we could just talk for a second.
You want me to say something? Does that work?
We good. Yep.
Okay. This should be interesting.
I'll start here. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are being joined by lots of people streaming us live on YouTube as well and more as we continue on this evening. So very, very exciting to see everyone here. I am extremely excited about our special guest speaker this evening here at Har Shalom. I have had the true pleasure, and I mean that in every sense of the word, to have known Bruce Ruck for many, many years as a congregant here. Even more so over the last few years, as Bruce has been an invaluable member of our team of medical advisors who really helped us through COVID, as I'm sure Bruce will share. The role that New Jersey Poison Control had during the COVID pandemic was pretty second to none. And then Bruce approached me during the high holidays this past year and said, you got to hear this story, and started telling me a little bit of what we would then find out became a Netflix movie, and then I think more to the point, the accompanying documentary, which is what Bruce is going to talk to us this evening about. For those that have had the chance to see the documentary, and I was just talking about having seen it last night, it is explosive, does not even begin to describe the situation of what happened. But I think the most amazing part of it was the role that Bruce, who is our congregant of many, many years, has had in some of the most Jewish values of saving lives. So I am unbelievably excited, and I know I share with Rabbi Masitsky as well, in turning over our bima this evening to not just an incredible member of our community, but an incredible member of the New Jersey State Poison Control, the New Jersey State team, our very own Bruce Ruck.
Thank you. So this whole story, I don't even like to use the word story, but the whole situation really started back in 2003. And here we are 20 years later. And what's really scary to me about this whole thing is there is a physician that was just arrested for something similar. There is a nurse on trial in the UK right now for killing 10 babies. This whole issue of healthcare murderers is really just a phenomenal topic that really needs a lot more work. We knew what, we knew when, we did not know who. And when I say we, it was myself, several other people in the Poison Center, and the medical director at the time, Dr. Stephen Marcus, who was with us. And the two of us took a big brunt of a lot of the discussion that I am going to talk about. We are the State Poison Center. I don't want to bore you with everything right now, but we're 24/7, we're 365, and we get around 50,000 calls a year about relating to poisonings. Everything from my 2-year-old just got into my edible marijuana, that's a whole other discussion, to anything and everything that you can imagine, including the scariest ones are the 13 and 14-year-olds right now that are killing themselves. And you don't hear about them because they don't make it to that point, but they're sick and they end up in the hospital. So we also get involved, as you heard a minute ago, with a lot of other things. I mean, this was just our COVID volume. We had a lot of COVID calls. We get involved in a lot of other things as well. And these are just my latest graph on the medical marijuana, not medical, but on the edible marijuana in children less than age 5, and all the kids that are getting into it at that age group. It is just absolutely amazing. The topic started on June 18th in 2003. We got a call at the Poison Center from a nurse at Somerset Medical Center, and the nurse said to one of our staff, we have a patient here whose drug level of this drug called digoxin keeps rising. We're not giving him the drug anymore. It was stopped. Does that make any sense? And it made zero sense to us, because you don't see that. So when we spoke to them about it, and the level had continued to rise for several days after the drug was stopped. Could it be a medication error? Medication errors happen in your house. They happen in hospitals. They happen everywhere possible. Could it be somebody was accidentally given this patient the medication? We looked into that issue. And the more they discussed it, it appeared less and less. And then they came up with this idea, and the nurse said to us, the family or somebody is giving this gentleman a mushroom tea. Could there be a tea that has with mushrooms that causes this drug digoxin to be produced? Are there any natural sources? And the actual answer to that is no mushroom, but there are natural sources of this drug digoxin. And that is a beautiful plant. And I don't know if I have anybody that's into plants. Anybody know what that plant is? That's foxglove. That's foxglove. And if anybody saw the Van Gogh show, all Van Gogh's beautiful paintings, The Starry Night, had the yellow-green halos. And he was probably chewing on the foxglove plant at the time. And if you notice the frog is very interesting. It's a cane toad. I don't know if anybody's been in Florida recently, but unfortunately there are dogs dying in Florida of the cane toad because they eat the toad, and the toad has this drug called digoxin-like cardiac glycosides on its surface. And so could there have been a mushroom? So Dr. Marcus, the medical director, said, let's get it analyzed. We get the tea, we have it analyzed. There's no digoxin in that mushroom at all. So we move on from that June day, and then we get another call, and the other call was from one of the nurses in the hospital. And the staff gets me on the phone with this nurse, and the nurse says, the pharmacist, gives me the whole story. We have a patient here who has this drug level called digoxin. The drug level keeps going up. We're not giving him the drug. Any ideas? And the first thing I said to her was, is this the same case your nurse called me about 2 weeks before that? And it was not. And the pharmacist said to me, this is not the same case. She was actually shocked I knew about the first case. And she did not want to really discuss, could this be a med error? Could this be anything like that?
How did they know to test for digoxin? Did they say something's not right, test his blood, and find every drug in it?
No, that's an old TV show, Quincy, where they did that. And for the new kids, that's NCIS, okay? That doesn't exist. The patient had been on it previously, and it was stopped. She had all the clinical symptoms of it. There were very specific symptoms of side effects from it. So on July 8th,
What do you use digoxin for?
it's used for heart failure usually, or for people that have various arrhythmias, to treat the arrhythmias. So on July 8th, while this is going on, when I got the call from the pharmacist and she's asking me about levels, I then said to her about that other case, and she said no. I said, is anything else strange going on? Do you have any cases of people dropping their blood sugar, becoming hypoglycemic? Do you have any patients developing very high potassium levels? And again, absolute dead silence on the phone from the pharmacist. And I had known her for many years, so it was not the same case. And now she's telling me they do have some strange things happening. So why did I ask about the hypoglycemia and stuff like that? Because we've seen these things 30, 40, 50 years already, where I hate to say it, if you're going to try and kill somebody, these are the classic things in a poisoning, especially in a hospital, that may be used. So I asked her about the hypoglycemia, and basically she said, yes, but you probably shouldn't know about that. Because she really didn't want her higher-ups to know she's coming to me, and they really didn't want her coming to me. The administration did not know at first that we knew about that first case. The nurse never told them we knew about the first case.
Is that a HIPAA issue?
No, because we're totally covered with HIPAA because of what we do. So,
Was it the same nurse?
I'm sorry?
Was it the same nurse?
So the first call about the mushroom tea was a nurse. The second call was the pharmacist. So the pharmacist had called, and when she said to me about the case, when I said to her, is this the same case the nurse called about, she was stunned that I knew about that case because they didn't know the nurse had called me or called the center at that point. So when I said to her, do you have any patients with hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, and these other things, again, dead silence, she said no. So my next comment was, you have a police matter on your hands. This sounds like murder. This sounds like a police matter. The pharmacist didn't really even want to entertain that, not to her fault, but I know where she was being pushed in the background, and she really wanted to get back to, how did this level get so high? And there was no explanation unless somebody was giving it. We talked about lab error, we talked about medication errors. You can have one, you can have two. You're not going to have a bunch of different things. And again, that's why I said at that point, this sounds like murder. You have a police matter on your hands. So we had suggested setting up a meeting with myself, the medical director, Steve Marcus at that point. Later that day, we wanted to get their risk manager involved. We wanted to get their chief medical officers involved. We needed them to go to the authorities. And they called us. They didn't want to talk to us at first. Then we finally get in touch with them. And the pharmacist was getting very nervous at this point because we're really pushing her, and her job is on the line. And the risk manager was really threatening to them on staff, as we now know, and to everybody else. And we finally get a few phone calls together, and she's screaming at us. The chief medical officer is screaming at us. His name was William Cause, and he's not even shown in the documentary. And he's screaming. My medical director and I decided we're going to play good cop, bad cop. He's going to play the bad cop. He's going to do the yelling, the screaming, and the nastiness. I'm going to try and be the good cop and keep people on our side talking to us, getting more and more information. And they refused. We had multiple phone calls over 2 or 3 days. They refused to go to the authorities. We wanted them to report this to the state. They said we're crazy. They said we don't know what we're talking about. We're blowing things out of proportion. There has to be a great explanation. No matter what we said, they tried to turn it away.
Is there a reason you couldn't call the police?
Bruce, will you repeat the question so they can hear them?
So the question is, there a reason we didn't call the police? We were going to, and we ended up reporting it to the state, as you'll see in a minute. We needed them to do it because they had all the information. We really had nothing except the word of mouth of these, quote, medication errors. And they really needed to report it, and they also needed to alert the family, which they never did. And that's going to be an interesting point in a little while. So we set up some more calls for the morning. Again, they refused. Finally, Dr. Marcus went ahead. He notified the state. So the state was actually called by us on July 10th. We told them what was going on. They said they would look into it. The hospital still did not report it when Dr. Marcus went ahead and reported it to the state. So now we're having conversations with the state, what's their role in this? And the state went ahead and they came in and they did a licensing inspection. A licensing inspection is make sure your policy and procedures are in place. Your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, and we really didn't know what was going on at the state level at this point. They kind of, I don't want to say pushed us aside, but they were supposed to have taken over the investigation. What we thought would be a murder investigation, turning it over to the prosecutor's office. That never happened. So their team is still screaming. They're telling us we're forcing their hands inappropriately. And if you listen to the documentary, you'll hear the pharmacy director say to me, basically, you do what you have to do, but remember, the people out there need you, and if you guys force us to do this, we're going to do everything we can to shut you down. He doesn't use those words, but that was the implication, and there was actually a letter written, which I should have a copy here, which I'll show you in a minute, similar to that effect. So the book has a lot of the transcripts on it. There's a book called The Good Nurse that has the actual transcripts of a lot of the tapes that we had. So we went ahead, we had reported it. Dr. Marcus said, again, he had enough is enough. We reported to the state, and the state does an inspection. And we hear nothing until July 26th. Now, this is in June. July 26th, the Department of Health fines the hospital $10,000. Why? Because they never reported it to the state. We did. And they never informed their families. Their family members died from, quote, a hospital-induced overdose, whatever the cause of it was. And there was some conferences in New York where this stuff was presented by us just to say, hey, what's going on? And Dr. Marks had made that presentation. This is the letter. This letter is from the Assistant Commissioner of Health to the Poison Center, to Dr. Marcus, basically saying, William Cord, the Chief Medical Officer, has said, you guys were nasty, you guys were mean, you guys forced them to report everything. What are you going to do about it? And the Assistant Commissioner says, we're not doing anything about it. We're not going to, chastise the Poison Center. You guys should have reported it. That was the Assistant Commissioner of Health. Again, this is August 8th now we get this letter. So at this point, the hospital assumed it's over with. They assumed they got fined, it's over and done. Then comes October 27th. I hear nothing, none of us hear anything October 27th. On October 27th, the two detectives called the Poison Center. They didn't call the Poison Center knowing about, let me rephrase that. They called the Poison Center to learn about a drug called digoxin. They didn't call us knowing we had any clue what was going on. So when they called us, one of my staff gets me on the phone, because I'll deal with the police, but the staff won't. And they said they're calling from Somerset County Prosecutor's Office about a drug called digoxin. Without missing a beat, my next comment was, oh, you're talking about Somerset Medical Center. Dead silence. It was unbelievable. They had no clue that we knew, and we had no clue they were actually called in originally. So now they said to me on the phone, I don't know how many of you know where the prosecutor's office in Somerset County is, but from that to my office in Newark on a good day is 40, 45 minutes down 78. And the two detectives said, we'll be there in about a half hour, in about 15, 20 minutes. And I'm like, we'll see you in about an hour. He says, let's make it 20. Within 20 minutes, they were sitting in my office. They must have been 100 miles an hour down 78. It was unbelievable. At this point, Dr. Marks and myself go running up to find a lawyer because we just can't speak to the detectives and prosecutors. We found in one office, we were lucky, her name was Frida Zakin. She was a godsend, the lawyer that we dealt with. And she gave us all the permission we needed to release everything, to do whatever we needed to do. And we would have probably ended up doing it anyway, but that's a different discussion. So the comment again, oh, you're talking about Somerset Medical Center, and they were stunned. They had no idea that we knew what was going on at this point. Again, we knew what, we knew how, we knew when, we did not know who. And that was damning in many, many different ways. So the detectives come down, and what we found out was from the time we told them they had a murderer on their hands, from the time they screamed and yelled at us to mind our business, he killed definitely 5 more people, and we believe up to 16. So he remained killing people despite us telling them they have a murderer on their hands.
There were 4 deaths at the point at which they spoke to you?
There were 5 plus the 4 that we knew about, and not the 1 or 2 didn't die originally.
You knew originally, and then in the time span, there were another 5, and then you're saying ultimately by the time they catch them,
There may have been up to 16.
At
May-
what point was the prosecutors, they called you because they knew about the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, but not the 1, 2, 3, and 4?
So that's a very interesting discussion.
Read the question.
So the question is, when did the prosecutors really find out? My question for the last 20 years almost has been, who finally went to the prosecutor?
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. I found out about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. It turned out to be, if this story is true, one of the assistant commissioners of health put on my Facebook, on my LinkedIn page, I was the one who went to the prosecutors in October 3rd. I never knew that. I was stunned because we didn't know who. No. One of the assistant commissioners of health went to the prosecutor's office. Why he finally went, whether it was the yelling and the screaming that was done originally by Dr. Marcus, whether it was somebody else had said recently, it may have been a board member. It may have been a board member of the hospital who then went to the state, who went, we don't know. All I know is on October 3rd is when the prosecutor's office was notified. And the prosecutor's office, again, didn't call us to the 20-something. In between, they were meeting with the staff, they were meeting with people, but they were hiding everything. They were not being, the hospital staff was not, the administration was not being honest with the prosecutor's office. And what the prosecutor said to me the other day, again, I haven't spoken to them in 20 years, this brings out all your old friends. And one of the prosecutors said that if it wasn't for us at the Poison Center and answering the phone, oh, you're talking about Somerset Medical Center, they may have had to drop the case because Somerset was just not cooperating. They weren't providing any information to help confirm there was a potential murderer. Nurse Amy, when you see what she got involved with, she wasn't involved until after much of this has happened because then they needed her to help get him. There was another question?
Yeah, do you think that it was posted on LinkedIn in light of the Netflix?
Oh, yeah, that's why.
Like they wanted to cover themselves or make sure?
No, I think he was just saying, just so you know, this is what happened, because somebody had wrote to me and said, who finally went? And I said, I don't know. And then he put on there, he says it was him. So the prosecutor's office, again, notified October 3rd. He was actually allowed to work, even though the prosecutor's office now knew about it on October 3rd. They called us, again, on the 28th. He was allowed to continue to work till the 31st of October. They continued to allow him to take care of patients. Did they know it was him at that point? Oh, yeah. Well, did they know it was him? We didn't. They had a good idea at this point who they were looking at. There were some other, nurses are very smart people. And they started pointing fingers. So the detectives at Somerset Medical Center, the chief medical officer, the risk manager did everything they could to hinder the investigation. There was paperwork they could have provided, they refused. There was a computer system, a dispensing system called Pyxis that had the report. That thing has a memory probably that could hold a year or 2 or 3 worth of data. They said, oh, it only holds 30 days or less of data. They were just doing everything they could to hide it. Finally, we didn't even know what was transpiring at that point. On December 15th, the Somerset County Prosecutor Office finally charged Cullen with attempted murder. So it took all that time, even from October when they finally fired him, until December 15th when they finally charged him. 12 to 15 deaths, 16 deaths after, we suspect 16 deaths after we told them they had a murderer in between that period. The official number, what he admitted to, was 5 more. So he ultimately admitted to 29-something murders over all the years. But we believe it was closer to 300 or 400 murders. And here comes why. Could have he been stopped sooner? And that's the part of the big issue. So hospital officials at that point said that when they hired Cullen, they had no knowledge that he had ever been investigated for harming patients before. Every place he worked, for 16 different facilities, they said, you either quit or be fired. If we fire you, you're not going to get another job. So he just walked away. Some of the places said they fired him, but none of his personnel files ever used those words from what we were told. The president of the hospital at that point said, this is a classic case of how the system failed everybody. He was the biggest failure. His system was the biggest failure in my mind because we told them they had a murderer and they did nothing about it. He started his career at St. Barnabas, right? First job at a nursing school, they said you quit or be fired, he quits. Goes to Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg from 92 to 93. He's questioned about the death of a 91-year-old patient, quit or be fired, he quits. Huntington Hospital, 94 to 96, the nurse manager said this was the best nurse she had for years. Gave him glowing recommendations, said he was the best until strange things started happening. And then basically she says to him, you're going to be terminated if this happens once again. What does he do? He quits. But the strangest thing is, they were short nurses. So even though he quit, they said to him, can you come back and work a few shifts a week? And now he's working again a few shifts a week. Morristown, 97, January to August. He was vetted by a service. They found some discrepancies in his employment application. They hired him anyway, and they ended up firing him for poor performance. He was murdering people, again, at Morristown.
But Bruce, is the idea, though, that his patients are dying, and they're saying he's just negligent? Like,
Not all his patients.
Bruce, repeat the question.
So the question is, did they just say he was negligent? Listen, the problem is, could have somebody said, look, I've been around for 33 years, 34 years doing this. If a pharmacist made a mistake that ended up killing someone, I would hate it. I would want that pharmacist on my staff. Why? Because I'll never make that mistake again. They'll be the safest person that I'm a very big believer in second chances when it comes to errors and stuff. I really am. But this was clearly not an error. If a hospital had 1 or 2 errors, they had tons of these things going on with this guy. There was one point the nurses suspected him And they actually caught him hoarding medications in the garbage can in the med room, hoarding it. And he was using it to kill people. But nobody wanted to see what he was doing. So he goes from Morristown to Liberty of Nursing Rehab in Allentown, Pennsylvania, 98. They fired him there. And their representative, when questioned, after he was finally arrested, said the facility does not give out performance records. That's not our policy to give those out. And that's the big problem in healthcare. And in many jobs, when people are fired or people are let go or quit and you go for a job, the background checks stink. And they will say to you, well, we're not going to tell you if this person was good or bad. We're just going to tell you they worked here from this month to this year or this year to that year. They don't tell you, oh, that teacher had the worst record ever, failed half the kids, and no one ever wants this teacher. Because they don't want to be sued. And no one's willing to take that risk. There is a law in New Jersey, and I think it's 33 states called the Cullen Law, that if they are not honest and tell prospective employers now about a dangerous person, they themselves can be criminally liable. But
Is it because digoxin is not a controlled substance? Because I thought they had to check out meds, and when they give meds, they make sure that if there were 5 pills, there were 5 dispensed. So how can you hoard drugs? Because I really thought, I know years ago I was candy stripe, but they didn't do it. But
yes, so the machine that he was using. I'm sorry. So the question was, how does somebody take so much meds and hoard it, basically? Yeah. It is so easy, it's unbelievable. It is still easy, it's unbelievable. It's harder today, yes. Controlled substances have to have 2 people watching, have to have sign-off. The machine, yes, you have to put your code number in or your fingerprint in for the drawer to open up to get meds. But what he was doing is, he was going in, taking the meds he needed, just putting it in, but then canceling it. So nobody ever realized he was doing it until you look for certain reports. And when they finally pulled the reports, they found it. The other problem is the machines back then looked like a donut. And when the drawer opened, it wasn't just to that med, it was to all the meds next to it. So he could have pulled just about anything he wanted. Yeah, it is an absolutely amazing, was and is still an amazing situation.
So in the documentary, when they showed the drawer, that's actually what it is. It opens up and there's a multiple in there, so you can take as many as you
Yes.
want. Wow. Okay.
Some of the newer ones you can't. Controlled substances you can. But as I say to people when I teach, and I teach in several of the nursing schools, yeah, the most dangerous drugs that you all hear about on the street, the narcotics, can kill somebody, but so can Tylenol, or so can half to 90% of the other drugs when used inappropriately. So he goes to this Liberty Nursing Rehab, and again, it happened there. Goes to St. Luke's in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, 2000 to 2002. Meds started missing, patients started dying, nurses started complaining, and that's where they found all this antiarrhythmic drug hidden in the med room. He was hoarding it. He was using it to kill people there as well. They start an investigation at St. Luke's. A lawyer gets involved and says, you better resign and we'll give you a neutral recommendation, or if not, you're going to be fired. So he resigns. They escort him out. Goes to St. Luke's. At St. Luke's, a nurse actually reported it, if you see the documentary, reported it to the police. Police went ahead and did an investigation, and they had to drop the case. The district attorney dropped the case because St. Luke's would not cooperate. They wouldn't give them the information they needed, and without the information, there's nothing they can do. Goes to Sacred Heart Hospital in Pennsylvania. He's let go after 2 weeks. Why after 2 weeks? Because some of the nurses there had worked with him previously, and they said to administration, either he goes or we go en masse, and just we're all walking out. And they let him go, and they used some crazy documentation issues that his resume didn't add up at one point. And that's how they got rid of him from there after 2 weeks. So the question then became, did Somerset Medical Center ever contact St. Luke's? Miller, who was the president of the hospital, said, yes, we did. St. Luke said they absolutely did not. Who do you believe? I know who I believe, but it's definitely not Miller. So the big issue is, and one of the greatest comments was in the news at that point, and it said, let's see, the comment of providing feedback is just provide the dates of employment. Just tell people they work from this date to that date. That's what everyone does until the legislation protecting against the liability of saying something damaging is changed. And it supposedly has changed, but I will tell you, one of my employees just left, great employee, have no complaints, no nothing. I didn't get a call. Well, actually, we got a call saying, did he work here from such date to such date? And I'm technically not allowed to even answer that question. I have to refer him to Human Resources to answer that question, because nobody wants to take a chance of somebody saying the wrong thing and getting sued. So in 2008, there was actually a financial settlement. 22 of the victims, the families reached a confidential settlement. This is 22. He admits to 40-something, and we believe 300 to 400 is probably killed. So these hospitals, and we know this because this was in the news, that now there may have been other settlements from hospitals that we're not aware of because they're all confidential. I will tell you, I did this program at the Watchung Library a few weeks ago, and somebody came up to me and said, we believe he killed their brother-in-law. And I said, well, what made you think that? And then they told me the prosecutor's office went to them and asked them to please allow them to exhume their brother's body so that they could test for the drugs. And the family refused. And they said many of the families refused. They just wanted, let him rest in peace, and that's it. So a lot of the things we didn't know. Cullen actually met with my old medical director at one point in jail to figure out some of the charts. They couldn't even tell whether Cullen killed him or not. So they were hoping somebody else could help him figure out who he killed and didn't. It was the craziest thing. And again, the scary part of all this, it's happened before, it happened again, and I know you probably can't see this, I shouldn't have used these slides, but these are just case after case after case since the 1970s of healthcare professionals that have been involved with murder. And many of them have gone from place to place. This is one of the latest. This is an anesthesiologist who tampered with an IV bag who ended up killing another physician. He had put a drug to stop breathing in an IV bag. Who he was trying to kill, we don't know. She took the bag because she wasn't feeling well, took it home to give herself an IV at home. That's a whole other discussion. And she ended up dying. And again, this other nurse here on trial now in the UK for killing 10 more. So it's unfortunate that this continues. No one knows what to do about it. No one knows how to stop it. And I guess I'm going to turn it over to the rabbi in a second, but my big question becomes, where does somebody's ethical, moral obligation, this Mary Lund, who was the risk manager, who did everything she could she was the risk manager, but whose risk was she managing? She was managing the hospital's risk. And whether that hospital's risk is to stop him from killing and not let anybody know he did it. And that's why they were fined $10,000, because they never told the families of this error. Call it error.
What was his motivation? Because there was some sort of hints in the documentary. It was either that or the movie that he, wanted to eliminate suffering from
No.
people. But it seemed like
There is no, to my knowledge. So the question was, did he try to eliminate suffering? Is that why he did it? A, that would still be wrong in this situation, but to my knowledge, and I say to my knowledge because I don't have an inside knowledge of that, but from the people who've interviewed him, from everybody I know who's been involved with it, no. Because he actually tried and did murder people that weren't dying and that weren't suffering. If you notice, there were big gaps in some of the years, a month here, 2 months there. He was admitted to multiple psychiatric hospitals in between for depression, for his own suicidal thoughts, and stuff like that. It is interesting that there is a former member of the congregation who's moved out of the area, who after this all happened said to me, "Bruce, I was friends with him and his wife for several years. The man is nuts." It's strange. But again, the whole idea why nobody stopped him, why everybody, again, that's,
Hospitals were more concerned about being sued for giving a bad recommendation to him than being sued by these families of the people he was killing?
they never knew they were going to be caught. They just figured, the question is, were the hospitals more scared about being sued by the families? They just never thought they were going to be caught. And again, I guess the risk manager, her job is to protect the risk of the facility more than anything else. William Cause, I know, he was gone from that hospital after a period of time. This Miller was gone from the hospital after a period of time. This William Cause, who tried to really get the poison center shut down, he went on the speaking circuit for a while talking about patient safety. You just want to throw up. I tell it like it is. The risk manager, Mary Lund, I recently looked to see where she is after several people have said where she is. From what I can tell, she's been promoted up the chain in that system.
And also, wouldn't it have been some sort of red flag that, oh, you were at this hospital for two years, and then you moved to this hospital for 2 years, and that's not a red flag either on a resume?
Today, no. Then, yes. Today, the 20-odd-year-olds, they change their job on a weekly basis, I think, half the time. Then it was a little bit more unusual. But again, oh, I'm moving here, my kids and my family. You could explain all that away. I'm moving for a different job. I'm moving for more money. You could explain that away.
Bruce, how did the documentary come about in the last few months?
So the documentary, there was a book written by this gentleman named Graber. He wrote the book, and the book came out in 2013. And I guess over the last few years, he sold the book rights, and I don't know how that works, to a producer or whatever. And they decided to make the movie called The Good Nurse, and that's the name of the book, The Good Nurse, which is a docudrama. There were some interesting facts in there, but it is a docudrama. It's not 100% accurate. And at the same time, Netflix wanted to release the documentary. They're doing a documentary on a whole bunch of killers right now, apparently. And I got a call last January, asking me if I would do it, Dr. Marcus, the medical director, if he would do it. And then if you see, there were some families that were interviewed and some other people. And the only thing I got out of this whole thing, good laugh, I got a limo ride to an old hospital in Brooklyn to do the film shoot, because they wanted an old-looking hospital, and there's an old hospital in Brooklyn somewhere that they use for film shoots. And I got a bottle of water. So I got nothing for this. I mean, and that's, it's kind of, it's not, I couldn't care less. I didn't do what we did for money or anything. We weren't involved with the production. We weren't involved with the movie. We had no idea what the movie was showing until the movie came out. Or the documentary. None of us were in the room when each other filmed, so no one knew what anybody was saying. Nobody knew what transpired. I'm going to turn it over to the rabbi for any comments.
Well, first of all, on behalf of, I know I'm going to talk at the mic.
Just turn it on.
First of all, Bruce, don't go far, please. We want to thank you so very much for enlightening us, educating us, and also reminding us that all of us are responsible one for the other. And when Bruce came forward to share what he had been involved in, of course, after we all lifted our jaws off the floor, because Bruce, truthfully, is one of the most humble gentlemen you might ever want to meet in terms of what his accomplishments are and what he does and how many people he saves and helps. We knew that it was so important to learn from this story. And Bruce came to me and said, but I don't know the Jewish aspect of this story. And I said, oh, yes, you do, Bruce. You've been living it every single moment of your job. And that is true, because the overarching teaching, of course, is pikuach nefesh, the saving of a life, one life is equal to saving the world. And what Bruce saw from the very first time when he spoke to the prosecutors and the nurse that called and the pharmacist that called was, you realize that you are dealing with murder. This is not about mercy killing. This is not about compassion. This is not about helping people choose suicide. This truly was, one could say, an illness or whatever it was that drove the nurse to taking people's lives who would have had more life to live. And it begs the question for all of us, what would we do, particularly in a society that is so incredibly litigious in every aspect of our lives? And that is not, please don't ever think that that is in any way a judgment. It's just a description of what we're living in. And I think, Bruce, that's what you presented, that is such a struggle, and where did Judaism have to lead? And it is very clear from that commandment, thou shalt not murder, period. It's not thou shalt not kill, because there are different reasons in life for killing, but thou shalt not murder. You don't even have to know number 11. Just knowing that is enough. So certainly, Bruce and I said we would take questions if there were any in terms of where does these biblical and Talmudic teachings come from, but certainly in his day-to-day life. Bruce, I would imagine that you also ask this of the parents who harm their children and the children who harm their elderly parents that you see, and the many myriads of abuse, because this is abuse.
Yeah.
Could you address that a bit?
You know, the question often becomes, where does accident versus abuse happen, or misuse? When I see the 2-year-old that gets into the edible marijuana, you know, accidents happen. Is that abuse because you left it laying around? But is that any different than the parent who accidentally leaves the hot pot of boiling water at the edge of the stove? And that's where we often have these conflicts. When do social services have to be involved? When do they not? What do you do? I mean, there was a nurse that called us several years ago. There was a gentleman who was murdered by his wife in the hospital. She fed him the poison while he was in the hospital, and he's saying, my wife's murdering me. And he continued to, and they allowed her to continue to feed him, and she killed the guy in the hospital. It happens, and it's just a matter of keeping your eyes open. That's what we do. Yeah, be careful.
Bruce, I don't know if you know this stuff offhand, but how many of the calls that poison control gets generally are anonymous people who are trying to report an overdose, don't want to get in trouble, versus people who are upfront and saying this is the deal?
We do get a few of those. There's not a lot of those. There's not a lot, but there are a few occasionally. One of the craziest ones that I had was many years ago was a woman who called, and this is when we still had landlines, and she called up and said, I think my kid took this drug, is it dangerous? Well, how old's your kid? The kid was a toddler. We said, based upon what you're telling us, it's no big deal, don't worry about it. Called back a few minutes later and said, is this drug dangerous? I think my kid got this, not that. We said, the kid should be. Then she called back a third time, within like 20 minutes. And we said, you know what, we think this kid needs to go into a hospital. So they never show up, and luckily we had a phone number so where we could do a reverse lookup. We had the police go do a welfare check. Any of you have kids know what a house looks like that has toddlers. I mean, there's just stuff around. So the police are looking around the outside of the house, they look in the windows, it looks pristine. They knock on the door, the woman opens the door, and the first words out of her mouth to the cops was, oh, I guess you caught me. That was the first words out of her mouth. And the cops are like, they played along. Turns out she was trying to figure out how to kill her mother. So, I mean, the strangest things, and there's a lot of mental illness. The majority of our calls are suicidal of the over age 5. You know, when you get into the 9, 10, 11-year-olds, 12 and above, most of those are suicidals.
to call you to say, I took this medication.
What do I do? Where do I get help? Or the hospital's calling, we just have a mother who brought their 12-year-old in, tried to kill themselves. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize, I guess from watching the documentary, that I always think of poison control as a home-based question, right? It's a sticker on your door that says if you ingest something. I didn't realize in the documentary that hospitals call you on your regular number to ask questions. Is that a
I
large part
get
of your job?
30, 40, 50 calls a day from hospitals.
Wow.
Everything from, we have somebody here again that just drank by accident, was working in their home garage, and sorry, I'm gonna get in trouble here. The wife said, you have this big, huge jug of windshield washer fluid. Why do I need a jug with only a little bit in it? They take it, they pour it into a small container, they don't label it, and little Johnny comes by and takes a swig. So we get all kinds of accidental stuff like that. We have schools calling us. We have a 13-year-old here that one of her friends just came in and said the kid took a whole bottle of Tylenol before she came to school. We have the accidental double dose of the ADHD meds. We get anything and everything that you can imagine that comes in.
How many calls per day? Approximately?
We get approximately 120 to 150 a day. 120. 50% of our calls are accidental kids under age 5. The above is much older, and a lot of those are suicides. Yeah. And abuse. We do get abuse, and some of them come in unconscious from what they're abusing or sick from what they're abusing. But a good percentage, especially the 12 to 14, 12 to 17-year-old age group, is all trying to harm themselves.
So who is staffing these phones? Are these
Everybody on,
pharmacists, or are they running scripts that you write?
everybody on the phone is a health professional. They're either nurses, pharmacists, or physicians. I have no lay people, no volunteers handling the emergency line. And I have some of my staff, I have 2 staff that are still with us that are there longer than I am. I'm there 33 years, they're about 36 years. So we have the gamut, but we do all the training. We train them all. And we try to staff with a total of 15 to 16 people employed. And we average about 4 on the phones during the day, 1 overnight, but always available is myself 24/7, the medical director 24/7. We have on-call medical toxicologists that are consultants with us that are 24/7. So there's multiple layers of backup to help each other out.
Do you feel as if trends are increasing?
The trend that's increasing to me is the drop of age of the suicides. It used to really upset me when I saw the 18 and 19-year-olds. Yeah, it still upsets me, but now when I get to 12 and 13-year-olds, and a good percentage of them are female. I haven't looked at my numbers in a while, probably 2 to 3 to 1 of the suicidal young kids are female. Yeah, by far, by far.
And it's much worse since COVID.
I wish I could say that. No, I don't see that. I don't see that. It's as bad now as it was then.
Do your trends mirror national trends?
Yes.
'Cause I know you're
Yeah.
a microcosm of what's
Right, so we cover the entire state of New Jersey. There are 52, 53 poison centers. Almost every state has one. If not, they're covered by one. Like Florida has 3 centers. Rhode Island doesn't have any, but they use Maine. So every state is covered by a poison center. And all our statistics are fairly similar. Fairly similar. Very scary. Okay.
Quick question, do you find the stats the same in urban versus suburban areas?
It's the same. It's the same. More money, more drugs. But again, we don't get called on the abuse. The 18-year-old or the 19 or the 30 or the 40-year-old that's abusing something, unless they get sick and need help, they don't call us. We don't do the mental health aspect of it. We do this person's blood pressure dropped or whatever it may be. That's what we get involved with.
So Rabbi, we know thou shalt not kill. What about the dozens or hundreds of people that just stood by and said nothing? The people that were talking at the water cooler. What does Jewish law have to say about that?
Repeat the question.
The question was asked, what does Jewish teaching, how does it inform us about being a bystander? And there is actually volumes of that in the Talmud, because as I think all of us would expect, we are not to be the bystander. One is to always find their voice. One is to always learn how to speak up, come forward, and save a life. That's always been the driving force. Absolutely, it's unequivocal. And you can't say too much about that in Jewish law. That's unequivocal, but that is. Absolutely. It goes as far as incredible stories that even if you see a roof that is dangerous, where a person may climb to a roof and fall off, it is the duty of that homeowner to put a fence around the roof, just in case if someone were to report that someone could fall off. There's another story in the Talmud that tells about the wood chopper, who, if there is someone who, and this is about postponing death, when even death is supposed to take place naturally, if someone is out in the field chopping wood, and it's the chop, chop, chop that is actually keeping the person alive, that wood chopper is supposed to be asked to please stop and it should not disturb a person who is about to die. So there is very, I think, such beautiful and human law to make both dying and living as important the focus as it needs to be. And I think, thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's so important for us to understand that everything we can do to enforce living, but also when the time to die comes. Judaism is very practical and thoughtful in that it should be done with shalom, literally, with peace. And
This, what kind of, is confusing, and again, it's not necessarily life and death, but you think about it, that pharmacist was like a whistleblower, right? But then we have whistleblowers who then get arrested or prosecuted because they're whistleblowers. So they're trying to do the right thing, but, they
She
put
was-
their own life, their own family at risk if they get arrested for saying something that they maybe weren't supposed to say.
She was afraid of her job. And she clearly, we clearly, at one of the phone calls, I called her back, the transcripts and the tapes are out there, and I said, we will do everything we can to protect you. We don't know who was going to protect us at this point, but we tried. She still works there. The pharmacist still works there. The director of pharmacy still works there. I ran into him for the first time after that incident about 8 years ago. I hadn't spoken to him in 20-something years, or 12 years, 13 years. And we shook hands. I know he went through a lot of turmoil. They all did. They all did.
well, I know you join me in thanking Bruce so very much for sharing so openly and honestly, and I hope most importantly, we all know a new number that we should put in our cell phones if, God forbid, information is needed, a whistleblower has some thoughts, but in all due respect, it's an incredible resource center that Bruce has taught me all about, the New Jersey Poison Information Center. So, Bruce, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
And please take a few moments to schmooze, because it's important. Thank you all. And to those who joined us online, we thank you very much and hope that you'll be with us for our next learning opportunity. Good night.